the people who also provide this information about accessibility attend things in those groups like the accessibility day. So we'll get into that. So let me jump right into sharing my screen, and we'll start from there if that works for you. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Perfect. Okay. So there's nothing on it. And that's the whole point, because we're starting from kind of a blank screen. And I'm going to be building and explaining. My build is going to be bringing content in, and kind of while I'm doing that, we can construct and deconstruct instead of going just from a pure entry part. But I'll even demonstrate those for those who aren't aware of like just how simple it is to sometimes just bring in raw text into WordPress and then format it in a way that not only works for just making sure your page looks right, but also for accessibility. So that's, as I'm bringing in this content, I'm looking at how I'm formatting the content right out of the gate. So I'll have more details a little bit, but again, as we're deconstructing things, one of the things to immediately start paying attention to in terms of the organization of the content are your headings. Your headings are very important in terms of organizing a document to help anybody who's needs any kind of assistive technology, whether they're using a keyboard, has vision impairment, those types of things. Having a great structure to your content is really important. So that's why while the title of the page, which in this case is Demo Build for Accessibility, we're using the Cadence theme here. I'll talk about themes in a little bit. But that would be your H1, your top level heading, and then your first heading here, I'm calling it Introduction, with my a little bit about me section, which is an H3. You can see it's heading H3. And then one thing to do is, as we're looking at this, as long as we're using core blocks, I don't think yet, we were testing this a while ago, that other blocks that use headings are not being read into the outline yet. But for this demonstration, and then I'll show using testing tools and all how the headings work. But this will show you the hierarchy. It's the English composition. Outline your document so it makes sense, and so that when you break things into sections, and that's how you want to pay attention to headings. So we're already getting ahead of that section just because that's part of how we're deconstructing that. So this is a live presentation, demonstrate what we're doing here. So you did thank you for introducing me. As I bring these things in, we do have the links, and also that our WordPress Hartford meetup group, a little bit about me. We've got a link, and just to show you as we're going, I'm doing this live. So as I jump around, here's the blank page, and then you can see the content coming in. Just for FYI, this is on a domain I have called accessible.press. And if you go to that homepage, you will see you can get a sneak peek, look ahead. Maybe that'll even prompt some questions in the short time we have. So for this tonight's demonstration, my build page is here, build for accessibility demonstration. I'm pulling everything from my source content. If I open this up in a new tab, you'll see that we're going to be kind of adding a bunch of content, but we'll walk through that as we go through the actual build page. So all of that is live and ready to be seen. So getting into what we will cover, and I'm bringing, just so that, again, sneak peek. Here's my document that I'm copying things from. No secrets here. So if I bring this in, no, I got to remind myself what screen I'm on.
We're seeing the finished page with a little about me.
Yep.
Okay.
So this on this edit page, hopefully you're seeing now the edit page.
Yes.
Okay, great. It's always fun too when so much of the WordPress editing experience is now all in the browser. Um, Sometimes the browser gets a little bogged down. I don't know if other people experience that, but so we'll get right into the topic. What is accessibility? This is from the W3C standards. Web accessibility is about designing websites, applications, technologies, tools, products, and services in an inclusive manner. And that's the key word, inclusive manner, lifting barriers to communication, interaction with the many people, the barriers that many people do face in the physical world. I'll have links to show, instead of getting into every last detail of why accessibility is important and all. And I imagine folks have seen some of those presentations. I do have resources for those that we can certainly go over and review as folks need to. So tonight I'm going to quickly create a WordPress post and review the accessibility topics as we go. We're doing that right now, as I showed. Now, these again, if you notice on the outline, H2 is my introduction. So these H3 sections, I've made those headings, fit within the hierarchy of that document. So I'm going to keep coming back to that because it's very, very important as part of building an accessibility page.
Okay, Peter, I'm going to interrupt you as I promised I would.
Yeah.
Laura asked a question.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about having only one H1 on a page and what that means for accessibility? And then we have a comment that some SEO tools don't see the page title as an H1.
Right.
So,
but they see it as a title. So again, the theme, we'll talk a little bit about themes. The theme is an important factor in this. So most themes, modern themes, will use that title of the page or post as the title of the document and the H1. It is understood that the page title, the H1, the top heading on your page are in effect one and the same. While you technically can add an H1 within a page as like a second H1, it's not recommended, because now what you're doing is you're saying, okay, so is this 2 pages? In other words, the page is about a thing that is your H1, that is your title tag. And then from there, you're looking at the subheadings below that. Is that
Can I ask for clarification? So
Yeah.
what you're saying is that I've got my title, which is my H1. So the first heading on my page should be an H2.
Yeah.
Well, shoot, Peter, do I have to go back and fix all my articles now?
No, you don't, because it's not hurting you. I mean, the whole idea of that title, that H1, and why, for example, when you bring a block in right now and it starts at the H2, it's starting at the H2 with the assumption that it's an element on a page where your H1 is your title. Now you can have things that work a little bit differently, like if you had a landing page, but even then the title would still come over as part of the theme. You do have to, and I'll talk a little bit about this, we can check, but it's really important to also inspect the page when it's live. So if we update this and I come over here and I update this to what I just added, and if I go to inspect and bring over the inspect, you can start looking at what are your titles, what's in your header and things like that. So you can see what your theme is doing. So that title, build for accessibility. And yes, we're not going to get into the SEO plugins that help you manipulate that. But in all my experience, and I'd welcome if somebody has a different perspective. Clearly, while there's set rules, the set rules are really malleable, if you know what I mean, with the way a lot of these things work. So there's an understanding. If you had a title and an H1, it still understood the format of the document makes sense. Where you run into trouble is if you had an H1 here And all of a sudden, and what's nice about a lot of the tools, it's going to tell you that, wait a minute, you've got a title in H2, then you're throwing an H1 to an H3, and you've messed up your ordering system of your headings. And then, yeah, this even clarifies your theme may already use an H1 for the post title. So there's kind of the pretty straightforward answer to that. So, using the tools that we have is certainly helpful. So if I make this an H2, if we come back here and then I use like a, what's a good tool? We'll look at Wave. We'll talk about Wave again. We're doing this. So Wave will show you, Wave is a website and a extension to your browser that you can install where it'll help you really test as you go your accessibility, any issues you may have. And one of the things that you're looking at in terms of the structure is the what is being seen. So Wave is a great tool to show you that while that title is the H1 introduction, a little bit. So if I were to change that, this would indicate errors like your structure's incorrect. So you've got a lot of tools that you could do, things that you get used to in terms of building with the structure and using the tools. You don't necessarily have to keep going back and forth to make it live check. You sure can do that. That is something that you can do. And then as you build those habits, it becomes easier and easier. One of the things that I say, and let me drop that content in right now, which is this content here. So we're building out the page. And now I'm adding another, because I'm still under the introduction, and now I'm under related. Oh, see, now this is, look what I've done here. This is actually a mistake. That should be an H3. Because that's part of my introduction. So my introduction, these are all subheadings. So this is again where it helps to see this. Now I'm still in my introduction area, and here's where I have a lot of resources that we can reference that really get into the nitty-gritty of many topics. So if we had questions about color contrast, if we had questions about how to evaluate a theme and things like that, there are so many great resources out there. You'll notice that a lot of them will tie back to Equalize Digital. So many of the folks who are in the know that Equalize Digital, Amber Hines, and her team, her husband, and their lead developer are very, very involved. They present a lot of people in things like the accessibility day presentations. In fact, there may be people, Beth, I'm not sure if you've done anything I know you've done some of the bigger presentation days and things like that, so that there's a lot of great resources there. If you go to these sites, let me refresh this, and I'll and go to that link, then you can see all the topics that can be really handy. One of the ones that was really popular this year, which always is Lainey, is it Feingold on the legal issues. She's kind of one of the more visible, vocal legal authorities on accessibility. So that's always really, really interesting. So that if somebody had a question about what are the legal aspects, that there are presentations out there, and there are a lot of things out there that really, really help.
Peter, you want to mention something about accessibility lawyer trolls?
Yeah, let's do that. I'll have you speak on this because of your relationship with a lawyer. But what we know, and so I'll even talk a little bit later, very, very briefly, about things that have to do with plugins, and that whole setting the fear of of what accessibility is, so that you have trolls that work on both sides. One is to make you afraid and what you need, how solutions can help protect you on the legal side, which may or may not be true. The flip side of that, and maybe this is what you're thinking about, Sue, which is the fact that there are, the accessibility version of the ambulance tracer, if you will, that are looking for issues with websites. And we've seen, kind of going off after people who didn't know that was even an issue, which is why, getting the word out and the education and what we can do. Actually, interestingly enough, even for what I'm doing here, things like having an accessibility statement, very, very important. I don't have that here. That's a whole other topic. There's a lot of ways of looking at that. Resources. I think Termageddon, which is a service that helps with kind of the legal, the terms and all, has an accessibility aspect to it. Sue, was there anything specific that you wanted to make sure was covered?
Only that this all started in California because they passed a law that said you could be sued for having a non-accessible site, and they gave it a monetary damage of $30,000.
Yeah.
And lawyers, I hate to call them lawyers, were sending out trolls to go look at sites, and they were going to hassle the heck out of you and see how much money they could get. And they were doing like 30 of them a day in court. So Termageddon, which Beth can talk about later, is a group that is fabulous for getting you updated privacy policies and cookie policies and all that kind of thing. But Amber Hines at Equalized Digital is kind of the United States resource for accessibility.
Yeah.
Her link is in the chat. And if you run a meetup, Amber usually will be a speaker. And I think she runs her own meetup.
She sure does.
Accessibility has become not just a good thing and a right thing to do, it's become a legal thing. So be careful.
Yeah, this group here, the WordPress Accessibility Meetup, is organized by Amber and Equalized Digital. Fantastic resource. What's also, again, everything that they do, I just really like, and I'll give you a couple other reasons why. So Equalized Digital's, we'll talk about, in fact, I can show you right now, the accessibility checker tool. It's a plugin. Fantastic. One of the things that's happened in the last year and a half, I think, was the front end tool. On the back end, as I'm building this out, I have the accessibility checker plugin running. It's a phenomenal free version. There is a commercial version for, basically larger commercial websites that want to do bulk checking versus just on a page by page. But for many of us who are doing kind of on the smaller scale or the DIY, the free accessibility checker is fantastic. On the back end, if I open this up, it should it'll kind of keep track of am I running into any errors, any issues? We could play with it later. This is mostly an error-free kind of presentation. Hopefully, there's always like warnings that come up. There's things that come up as errors that I can show you how to check to say it's a false positive. They do a lot to work on that. What's also pretty great is now they've got a front end version. So this plugin is running. I'm logged in as I'm building this. If I click on the front end, and I can go and I can start seeing, okay, what issues are we seeing? And we can walk through the things to pay attention to, what's phenomenal. And I have one of the links when you go to the full documentation for something, which is on their website. This is where you get into some really great deep diving explanations of things. So if you even want to just, I don't know, in your spare time, just kind of learn a new thing, if you go to the accessibility checker documentation, then you go to not only how to use the accessibility checker, the Equalized Digital's tool, but all of these things that it tests for is what, when you find an issue, it automatically links to, but then you get into, all the details behind it. Super amazingly helpful content, just as the documentation for the tool. So, if you didn't know it was there, it really is great. It really is great. So then if we look at some of the other things where the other services resources, I do have mine that I've done in the Hartford presentation and also accessibility today. But one of the ones that I created was getting started with WordPress accessibility. It is available on the Hartford WordPress website, which is hartfordwp.com. It is, if you go to the homepage just to see, it's, I think, the first one that landed on this page. So we post things on our page. So just to show you where that is, the accessibility right there. And, I've got, it's meant to be an overview, principles of, so this is, again, the stuff that I don't want to cover in depth now, but it's all it all ties into it. What are we talking about with who does accessibility help? And the answer really is everybody. And for all the reasons that we can get into, the compliance and law things to pay attention to. We'll make a point of saying we are not lawyers. The things to pay attention to, how it helps things like search engine optimization and all. But one of the things I like to say, the do's, I have the do's of WordPress accessibility, but the don'ts. And one of my first things is don't panic. So panicking that you have H1 tags, don't panic. Everything is manageable. And in fact, when it seems so daunting and scary and mysterious, it really isn't, based on what I'm hoping. We see some of the things doing it right now. This idea of just keeping some organization is a big part of making sure your website is accessible. And it's not really hard once you get into that habit. Any other questions before I bring in the next part?
Go ahead.
All right. As simple as this is, I'm bringing in. All right. So I want to be clear that a really good resource that I got a lot of the more recent. So I built some of these things. We've done some of these things, but I really did enjoy a recent presentation on that meetup group, and it was Paula Gonzalez, who also kind of is the overseer, the admin, if you will, on some of the things related to the group and letting people in and all. But she did her own presentation. It was really good. Accessible content for muggles, 10 action steps for an accessible website, or accessible content. So this link goes to her presentation, the video, the transcript, the presentation slides. Really nice overview. So that link is provided in this presentation here. What I also want to show you is, here's the beginning of doing things with links. Now, what you'll see with this theme, we'll talk about themes in a minute, but we are underlining and coloring links. Things like that are important to do. Sometimes on the design side, it's like, oh, I don't like the underlined links. Well, that's an accessibility issue that helps people know that you have links. Another thing that potentially that you should do is, if you are going to open a link in a new window, is make sure that you let people know that. And the reason for that is, if somebody is using a screen reader and they're not seeing the screen, and all of a sudden you open up a new window and don't let them know that, you are interfering with their ability to work with your website, because you now put another website front and center. And it's rude. I mean, in a way. But and also keep in mind that people are using assistive technology, have their ways of using a website, and by understanding that and kind of putting some of these best practices in place, you're not interfering with that. And that's why things like overlays, we can talk briefly about how overlays, that instant, install this plugin and now your site is instantly accessible and you're safe from all legal action and all. Not true, not good. We could talk about that. But in this particular case, I am opening this link in a new window. But what's nice is there are different ways to do this, but there is a plugin for that. And the plugin for that is, in this case, also provided by Equalize Digital, not to keep tooting their horn, but it is, if you have a link that, when you go to the link and you go to edit that link, and then you go to, well, let me get this. I like to use the toolbar right with the block, but there's sometimes things happen where they're below the screen. But if you go down and you say open a new tab, because I have that setting, I have a plugin, which I'll bring up in I'll show a link to it in a second, which gives you that notice. This is going to open a new window, and then it also has a little icon that says opens a new window. Kind of does that automatically. So that's a great example of where a plugin does solve a problem that you may have, where you said, oh, I've got a lot of things to open up in new windows. I heard in accessibility it's not a great idea. Let me clean that up. That's a nice little plugin that allows you to do that. So let's get into the next area. And I'll do this kind of one at a time. It's as if I'm doing slides. And let me, after a good friend of ours. So now I'm my H2 section. I'm in under building the foundation. These are all the things that make having an accessible website easier if you have your foundation built. So use an accessible theme. In this case, we're using Cadence. It's a classic theme. We could try this later if you want to do a little experimentation in the short time that we've got. But Cadence is a very good out of the box, does a lot of great things for accessibility. Ben Rittner does pay attention to it. Things like having the menuing work in such a way where you've got the drop down. But here's the thing, and I have a little part in this, but one of the best tests is, can you navigate your site using the keyboard? So right now I'm tabbing through. Of course, I've got admin. I should open this in an incognito. But you're skipped to content. So that was just hitting a tab. I'm just using the keyboard. Tab, going to the section. This box around it, that's having focus turned on. People say, oh, I don't like the box around links when I hit tab. That's an accessibility thing where people know what in the world they're actually looking at. I hit tab, the box around presentations. That is, if I hit enter now, I'm going to go to that link. About, and then the drop down, if I hit enter there, I don't have a long menu here. I just skip there, go there. If I, all through the keyboard, arrow down, tab down, hit escape, all the things. Like a lot of the accessible ones I find that are mostly accessible, they forget to add the hitting escape to break out of the menu, which is, and then forcing somebody to tab through everything. Think about it. If you're not using a mouse and you're tabbing, and now you have to tab through a million things because they didn't give you an escape route, it's not nice. and it's not best practice. And I want to keep saying that while this is all for people who need these services, you might break your arm and need and not be able to use your mouse the same way, or any number of reasons how this applies to what happens on a mobile device and things like this. These are all topics. Some of these links that I'm sharing that get into some of the details, kind of get into the weeds about some of those topics. So yeah, things to look for: excellent keyboard navigation, the proper presentation links, strong color and type controls, so that you can do some of the things we're going to talk about next. In the repository, you can filter by accessibility. However, that tag is something that the developer has to apply for, and there's a process. I think the process is getting better, but filtering for that tag leaves out a lot of really good themes. So, for example, Cadence, Generate Press, Bloxy, Astra. Those are strong themes for building a website that's accessible. Definitely beware of Google searches for things like best WordPress themes for accessibility. You will get tons of not good stuff. And always be sure to test your theme. Be sure to go through some of these processes where you test and see and make sure that you're getting what you need. All right, so let's bring out the next section. So from here, if I let's go to the list here. I'll talk about lists in a minute. Actually, it's easier to do this. It's funny when I watch other people do things, the different ways they do the same thing. There's a lot of different ways of doing things. I do use a lot of times the, add before and add after. I do use the list view a lot as a way of managing the content. It's always open for me. And yeah, to show the outline is, again, we're showing nice, and the light gray is good in this particular case. Things are ordered right. So, all right, choosing a color palette. Very, very important for accessibility because of contrast issues. There's a lot of meeting those guideline issues, and I've got a lot of links here. Tools that you can use, and I like. I'll show a couple really quickly right here. These do not have the indicator that says open up another, so I often right click. One tool I think that I kind of recently discovered is this one, which is building a color palette that is accessible by selecting a color and then having things build off of that. So say you like the color, I don't know, HTML purple color. You can see I already looked that up, which is this color here. So now if I go to this link, where did I put it? Right here. If I make that the one that I'm looking for and generate, it's saying, okay, if purple's your color, here are some colors that might work together. And it'll show you which ones where you can have the white on, where the palette might be something interesting to you, the colors work. And then there's another tool that I really like, which is this one here, which is the grid, the contrast grid, where you can load those colors up here. You can enter and you can play with, and then it's going to tell you in this grid view what works with what. And the DNP red does not pass mean, you wouldn't want to use this black on gray as your color. Actually, I'm sorry, that's not in the grid. So like the light gray on another light gray doesn't pass. You can't see it. It's just that simple. So this is a very important type of thing to look at. There are different ways of checking contrast. There is the web in contrast checker where you could put two colors together and it tells you. What's great is once you establish this as your foundation, you have to worry about it a lot less if you're using, especially if you're using a theme that has things like accent colors and things like that, like Cadence does. Or as long as you're paying attention to it, they say, I have a palette that says I can use this light color on this dark color, or this dark color on this light color. It passes guidelines. You won't get the errors that you would get in the testing tools because you didn't pay attention to things like that. Very, very, very helpful to, again, get that all done right at the beginning. Let me bring over some more content, which is, I'll bring over a few things here. There we go. So now I'm going to bring over from my sample as I'm building this page out. So we talked about color. So related design elements that you're looking for, that focus, which we showed you as you're highlighting the underlining the color links. I put this image there that I thought was kind of interesting because this was the t-shirt for this most recent 2024 Accessibility Day, which says focus, it's a feature, not a bug. Because again, a lot of people go, I don't like that line, get rid of it. And here, let's talk about alt text, which is describing what's in an image. So in this particular case, I already entered it, but I would write, this is an orange t-shirt. You could say on a male body, if you torso, if you can get to a level of detail where you can describe every last bit, but think about what's helpful. An orange t-shirt reading, and if you have words, the words should be part of your alt text, because if I can read that and see that as a sighted user, somebody who has vision impairment, who's blind, should also know what's in there. That is an inclusivity, accessibility rule. So when their screen reader comes across that, it'll say image, then orange t-shirt reading, focus, it's a feature, not a bug, WordPress Accessibility Day 2024. When you're writing alt text, alternative text for an image, and I think I have some details on this in a little bit, but You don't really have to worry so much about, capitalizing and making a sentence as being read, but there are some tricks in terms of like numbers. Like I have a client who's also a friend, and his site is 330 talent. So if I use something with 330, I might write that as the word 3 and the word 30, because screen readers might read it as 330 talent or 330 talent. So the more you're kind of aware of what happens by the screen reader, the more you can think about what's a good alt text for that image. So that's pretty important. So what else builds your foundation? Choosing plugins that are accessible, help with accessibility. The accessibility checker, we've already shown it. The screen reader text format is a great thing that says, if there's something that you don't necessarily want to show on your screen, but might be very helpful to somebody who can't see the screen, in terms of explaining something a little bit deeper, this screen reader text plugin is very, very helpful. And that's because you can do things like, and I think I did it up here because I think I saw it somewhere in something I brought in. If not, I'll show it in a little bit, which is you can add text that gets read, but it does not get seen by the screen reader. It doesn't get seen on the regular screen. A great example of this is if you have a learn more link, but in hidden, you might say learn more hidden about Accessibility Craft podcast, as I read that off the screen, that type of thing. So that's where using something like a screen reader text format allows you to have control over what both is seen, but making sure that on the screen reader side, you can really get into making sure that it's clear what somebody's going through. If you've ever seen a demonstration of somebody going through a website using a screen reader, Alex Stein used to do these a lot. First of all, the speed at which they run their screen reader is far faster than I'm speaking right now. Really, really fast. But then you can see all of the headaches and the trouble and the irritations that happen when a site is not set up well for accessibility. The accessibility new window warnings plugin I showed already. Cadence blocks, again, out of the box, having a set of blocks that pay attention to accessibility, having the right options within the options for blocks. So I like the Cadence blocks. Form plugins, WS Form, Gravity Forms are two of the top. Some would argue that Gravity Forms is the best, but they certainly pay. They have warnings and things that come up when you're doing things. If you've tested a website for accessibility and you have forms, you may find that is one of the bigger areas of finding errors because of things like misnaming and labeling, and people like, oh, I want to put the placeholder as the name of the field. It's like, yeah, but if you're on a screen reader, you don't know what input you're doing because you can't see certain things. So having a form plugin that works well for that. Able Player is something recently discovered through Paula Gonzalez's presentation, which is a way of having your presentations, your YouTube files, for example, any kind of media work. I've also seen people using media where they get trapped. Alex used something with podcasts, and he got caught in an endless loop of not being able to get out of this list because the plugin was just going through next plugin, next podcast, things like that. So it's really, really great. I have a link here to the Accessibility Craft. That is a podcast by, yes, you guessed it, the Equalized Digital folks. But that was one where they talked specifically about mistakes for WordPress plugins. Okay, let's go to here.
Just to interrupt one little time. If you're trying to build an accessible site and you've got video, you want the transcript. And
Yes.
That's one of the things that makes accessible websites more expensive.
Yes.
You can get one through Google and sometimes off of YouTube. They're not very good. They're not perfect. So it's kind of it's a problem. It's a costly thing to get, but you should, if you can't do the whole transcript, there should be a really good summary of it if you want to be accessible.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it is one of the things that delays, for those who are really paying attention. Um, Amber's presentations, it takes a little while because they get sponsored to have somebody actually transcribe live, but then putting that all together, it's hard and it can be quite pricey and time consuming. I'm experimenting with some AI tools to do some of this stuff, and it's becoming more and more as an effective option, but having to check it is really, really important. As I forget the presenter, but she talks about, she's presented a lot and she calls them craptions when they are done automatically, but poorly. They are not helpful. They're called craptions. As we deconstruct, by the way, the Accessibility Craft podcast, that graphic, it'll say image and read Accessibility Craft podcast. I don't have to describe necessarily that there's an alligator on a computer. This image here, my alt text that I had is cute little Wapu mascot holding a blue ball with the accessibility icon. I should probably say yellow, again, to further describe the image. So the key considerations for accessibility, this is kind of like the big list: the keyboard navigation, the structure we've been talking about all along, the alt text we've been talking about, the color contrast we mentioned, form labeling, we kind of briefly touched on that, responsiveness, having it work on different devices. The fact that there are lots and lots of people who don't have a computer, that is an accessibility issue. If you're designing for, it seems in 2024 that this is not something that we were worried about as much, but you would be surprised, especially things like the government websites and all of that, all of a sudden, that are required by law to be compliant. And yet, because when they were built, they have things that don't work on a phone, for example. And, a big part of the people who are using the website, that's the only way that they would have to get to it. Very, very important. ARIA is a big, confusing topic. I'm not going to get into great detail here, but it is, again, something that happens that helps when somebody's using assistive technology understand something because of a label, because of something that says, hey, this is your main section, might be an ARIA label. There's a great presentation that is linked to in the I'm drawing a blank on the digital Amber's website that goes into great depths about ARIA. And, one of the number one rules is, the best ARIA is no ARIA at all. But it is kind of coding. Don't really have time to get into that a lot. But again, another main thing is to test and to use. Yes, there are tools, but using something, if you have anybody that you can call upon, if don't expect everybody to volunteer, by the way, so paying people in that case, but there are ways, practice with one of the screen readers. I'm experimenting with, can I get AI to pretend it's the screen reader and give me a written version of, so more to follow on that. So those are, and there's the key guidelines, bringing some of these things together more quickly. I'm going to bring a bunch of stuff in now as I look at the clock, because we've talked a lot about this stuff already. In fact, let me bring in everything. And we'll walk through it. How's that? Okay. So I'm going to save this now. I'm going up. So we talked about those key considerations. Let's double check. Is my outline correct? Everything I brought in, I'm following H2, H3, H3, H2. And again, logical and not used for design elements. Oh, I'm using an H1 here because I like large text. That is not what headings are for. Now, if you want to do that, you can use the typography settings that are now coming into WordPress Better and Core, or if you're using something like Cadence blocks, the advanced text block is great because you can bring it in and say this is a heading, or I'm going to make it a div and then set the attributes. But you
Peter,
don't
let me
want,
do a quick interruption here.
Please.
My daughter is an SEO professional.
Yeah.
And she says, just stick your H3 there and make the text really small if you want. Stick an H2 there and change the size of it, but stick them where they belong. And changing the color and the size of an H tag does not impact your SEO. It's an H2. You've just changed the color or the size.
Yeah, absolutely. I would just argue with, I would just make the argument that, again, as long as you're using it because it logically breaks up and describes your document versus, oh, there's some keywords in here. I would say if you're doing that.
Yes, absolutely right.
Yeah. But you can absolutely change that. What something looks like and how it's designated as a heading are two different topics. So we talked about that keyboard navigation, how that's very important. Let's look at what I put in here in terms of the alt text here. Close up of oh, that should be black keyboard with backlit keys. So that kind of describes, hey, this is a close up of an image. One thing to also remember in terms of alt text, and if you're using any kind of alt text tools, when you bring images into your media library, if you're the kind of person who brings in a bunch of things and then says, okay, now I want to write the alt text. This is a bobcat in the snow, winter scene. That might even be enough. A winter scene bobcat in the snow. And I can write that. Now, when the next time I bring that into a site, that alt text will carry over when I put that image. What doesn't happen, just so that you know, is if you are here and you put this alt text for this image, and then you use this image again, it's not going to go, oh, on that other page, here's the alt text you use, unless you went to the media library and changed it. So some of the tools that say, oh, go change your alt text in your media library, that doesn't necessarily mean that the alt text gets changed in your pages and posts that are already there. So that's an important thing to pay attention to in terms of when you are going through alt text. There are tools that tell you where images are and all. And again, we don't have the time for that. Maybe a follow up on some of that kind of stuff. So using that keyboard, already demonstrated that. Proper ordering and nesting of headlines. We've been talking about that and how it's all about, there are SEO benefits, just as you're saying. So where, anything that is useful to somebody who's using a screen reader, any kind of assistive technology, tabbing through is beneficial to everybody, including the computers, the bots that are going through and trying to figure out what your site's about. So it's all a best practices thing. It's all a best way to do things. It's not I don't want to do, my client doesn't want to do accessibility. Remediation is a big deal. And I understand.
No.
Yeah, go ahead.
Peter, do you have time for questions now? Is this a good place? Okay.
Because I kind of have everything here. I wanted to make sure I did use a lot of list blocks. A list block is great for accessibility for a whole lot of reasons. It's structure, proves readability, but in screen readers, you'll get things like there's a list with 5 items ahead. So again, it's helping somebody. We talked about the alt text. By the way, if you're using icons, you don't need to use alt text. In fact, the default, if you don't put alt text, it is nulled out. It is basically a quote or nothing, which is important because if you're using a lot of icons, those decorative types of things, if you have a divider that's just a decorative swirl, that should not have alt text because that now it's doing the opposite. It's bogging down things. My able player, here's the short code that shows something. I'll show you in the front end. Forms, we can show this is just a straight out of the box form from WS Form, and then we'll talk about tools and testings. So why don't you key up some questions while I go over here and show you now on the front end how we're doing.
Okay, if you have a question, we are not formal. If you want to unmute, just ask your question. If just wait for a break in the action, you can raise your hand if you'd like to, but it's not critical. So go ahead, have at it.
Okay,
Yes,
Peter, I ask
yeah.
this question of people every time I attend an accessibility presentation, I ask this question.
Uh-oh, it's a test.
It is. All right. All right, let me just say this. I'm a little overwhelmed with all, I mean, as long as I've been doing this, as many talks as I've given at WordCamps, I'm still a little overwhelmed with all of the stuff that's not about building a website, right? Like privacy and accessibility and all of that.
Yep.
So, and I don't do government websites. I don't do nonprofits. What is there a list somewhere, like a checklist of the bare minimum that I have to do to make sure that my site is accessible? Like, I mean, okay, contrast, but then I've heard it could be too high a contrast, right? So
Right.
what is too high and what is right? And I mean, I know, look, my vision has gotten progressively worse, and I had an eye infection. I think God smacked me because I was complaining about accessibility.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I have a permanent loss of vision in my blurred vision in my left eye. So now I understand what people are struggling with, right?
Yeah.
And like there, that text right there, your regular scroll up where there's like a paragraph, right there.
Yeah.
That does not seem high enough contrast for me.
Okay.
I have to get closer to the screen to see it, to get the contrast. So what is the right level of contrast? How do I know?
Yeah. How do you know if you're doing it? Yeah. And there are the guidelines, the tools like that grid tool, the WCAG tool that I mentioned, that'll tell you technically what you need to aim for. So where we had, let's see. So like the wave tools here, right? Which is if I'm looking at this site using a browser extension, it's going to catch some of the issues. But as far as that list that you're looking for, there's a couple things. One is there are WebAIM guidelines. There are links to it. There are tools that show you WebAIM color contrast. So that contrast checker, if you really want to know in terms of what can be on what, foreground versus background, this is your most basic thing that's going to tell you what passes in terms of a color and a color. So if your foreground color is this blue and you're putting it on white, it's going to show you this particular tool. And again, you have browser extensions that do some of these things too. It's going to tell you if you are passing the standards of AA and AAA. Now, doesn't mean everybody in the world is going to see it. And as you were describing, not being able to see that contrast, that, your personal experience doesn't quite work with that. And then, you may have some other things where you employ a screen reader to some level. But these are the guidelines. I like Paula's presentation, and if you go to her slides, where she kind of breaks down, I think with a combination of some of the things that I've done, some of the things that you're going to find where it breaks down, where she gets into some of those top things to pay attention to. So that's why it's nice that 10 action steps for accessible content, which
that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to, I want to mention something, Beth.
Yeah.
Beth builds sites for other people. If you're an agency and you're building sites for other people, please make it clear in your contract. You should always have a contract, and in writing that you are not guaranteeing WCAG any kind of accessibility. If they want if they're willing to pay for that, then you go buy Amber Hines' Pro plugin where you get them to do audits and talk to you about things. Don't guarantee it because you're going to get hit with a legal thing. I'm not a lawyer, but please just
I'm married to one.
Well, that's okay. But he's in the other room. But the deal is that you should never promise any level. There's WCAG. I put the link in the chat. There's AA, there's AAA, there's all kinds of levels. Don't guarantee it.
But again, what I was looking for, and thank you, Peter, that helped a lot, is, as Dev put in the chat, accessibility is a never-ending process. You can work on it forever and continue and continue and continue. At what point can I say, this is good enough, right? And I think you gave me the answer to that. Thank you.
Okay, there's a question, Peter, about dynamic components like pop-ups, video backgrounds, sliders, tabs, accordions. Is this ARIA or what is today's best practice for that? Because I don't know the answer.
Yeah, there's a that's a deep topic and nothing we're going to solve here. But here's a couple of things to pay attention to. One, in terms of animations, autoplay, don't ever autoplay something. Background sliders that move in an autoplay are acceptable as long as you do a very special thing that people don't realize to do, which is there is a when people have on their computer, they have a setting that says reduce motion, right? And it's a computer setting, which is interesting, not even a browser setting. But people who get motion sickness with things that move will set this rule so that you should respect that. In other words, if you have something that moves and you look for, I can't remember, I have a note somewhere on this. You look for the respects. I'll look it up in the next section, but respects that setting, which then says, don't make this move that you might make move for somebody else. Buttons should open something on a page. Buttons are not navigation. You can have navigation that looks like a button that opens up another page, but a button itself are things like you've submitted a form or you're opening up a modal, a pop-up, things like that. In terms of best practices, I see, like when I see a website that has every time as you scroll, everything flies in. Please don't do that. It drives me crazy. It drives everybody crazy. I don't know why people think that looks great. So if I'm offending you for saying that, sorry. But I can scroll fast and go, this page contains nothing, because you're waiting for everything to fly in for reasons that don't make a whole lot of sense, to be honest with you. It's just
There's also a marketing survey that says on websites, when people see something moving,
yep,
they think it's an advertisement and they'll scroll past it. And then the second half of this amazing study was people don't click stuff in sliders.
No.
Sliders are there because you think they're cool. And if you go back as far as, well, Naum and I do you remember those Flash intros?
Sure do.
Where every single one of them had a little skip intro in the bottom corner?
Yeah.
And we did them because we could, but they served absolutely no purpose
whatsoever.
But so sliders are really not your best way at the top, above the fold at the top of your page.
Yep.
Yeah. And real quick, that was me that asked the question about the dynamic content. No, yeah, I'm in total agreement. I was just looking for more in my arsenal. So then when clients come to me and say, hey, I want all these doodads and gadgets and whiz-dos, rainbows popping up everywhere, that I can show them, no, we need to be accessible and we need to focus on SEO, not on all the trinkets and fly-ins and all the crazy stuff.
all of that stuff gets in the way of getting to the information that you actually want people to access in all the different ways that they need to access it. So again, it's like, oh, well, it makes me look jazzy. It's like, come on. Not only does it not, you again look like everybody who's doing that. I've seen sites that give me no valuable content and only that kind of stuff. And like things like, I'll tell you real quick, one of the things that drives me absolutely crazy, when I'm on a website potentially buying something and I get the little beep and the little pop-up in the corner who tells me that, Joe Schmo from Eastford, wherever, just bought this version. Oh my goodness, now I want to do it. No, now I want to leave your site because you're distracting me from the purpose that I came to learn and to buy your product. I'm like, is that a notice for? Oh no, it's his stupid thing. Stop it. It's just
it's the mantra of nonprofits. Make it easy for people to give you money.
That's it. As frictionless as possible. So anything that you see that gets in the way of something, that's an accessibility thing that then carries over to every other kind of user. And search engine optimization. If you're getting in the way of presenting a clear message, you are not helping your site visitor, whether they're using system
Well,
technology.
it's that old adage, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
I have a friend.
I know when I first started using a page builder, right? It comes with all these fancy widgets and all these things you can do. And oh, let's do an accordion here, and let's do flip boxes here, and let's do something else over here. And it's too much, and it doesn't really, it's cool, but
Yep.
it doesn't really enhance the usability of the website at all.
That's right.
People, there's a question about ads on web pages now. Ads are obnoxious. People hate them, and it's the only way some people can put up websites is if they do ads.
Right.
I get frustrated with newspaper homepages that have video things moving around. It's really something that we had web 2.0, we had web this, we had web that. We're now in web accessible. And I think the answer to ads is ad blockers. I mean, I don't know how people navigate the web without an ad blocker. I don't go to sites. There are one or two sites that won't show me their site because I'm running an ad blocker. I'll go buy it someplace else. That's pretty easy. We have gone over time, and I don't want to abuse Peter's niceness because I know he'd stay till the last question was asked. But does anybody have a good final wrap-up question? If not, in a couple of days, we'll get the video online with a copy and or a link to Peter's presentation and all his links. And you can, if you want it, download the chat. I found the setting for that one. But Peter, thank you very much. And thank everybody for being here. It's good. We're trying to help rebuild this group, and you coming for a topic as good as Peter reinforces my idea that we should have great speakers and people will come. And I'm glad
also,
you're all
Peter,
here.
Excuse me for interrupting, Sue, but I wanted to make sure that Peter saw this in the chat where Dev said, I just added the WebAIM extension to Chrome and it's helpful. Thank you. I'm glad I attended this meeting, not only learned, but also took some practical things that I can use, and that's priceless in my opinion. That's very high praise, Peter.
Hey,
Thank you very much.
Dev, you can come back anytime and we may get you to run a meeting. And now I'm going to be in touch with you soon to be one of our speakers. He and I go back a long way, a long time.
If anybody here has a topic they'd like to speak on, we'd be very interested in hearing what you have to say. Just ask us.
Very good.
Okay, thank you all very much. And we're gonna, Peter, just hang around for a minute, please.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if time to get on with your evening and your life, and we'll look forward to seeing you in December. You'll get a little notice for Meetup that says what we're gonna do. So y'all have a good evening. Thank you, Peter, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you all. Good night.
Let me stop the recording.
Got to say, great job, Peter. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Nice presentation. And, I don't get to see you that often, but sometimes